Hello, welcome to Experimental Biotechnology NPTEL course. Hope my slides are visible and I'm audible. We shall start the session. So, this is week 11 assignment solving session. We'll discuss few topics related to all the questions. So, this course is offered by Professor Vishal Trivedi, IIT Guwahati, and I'm one of the TAs, Sumati Raviraj from University of Hyderabad. So let's start. So we have many DNA sequencing methods this week. So one of them is Maxim Gilbert DNA sequencing method. So this is a short overview of it. Yeah. So the Maxim Gilbert method, also called the chemical cleavage method, is an early DNA sequencing technique. So it relies on the chemical modifications of specific bases in the DNA. This is followed by strand cleavage at those modified sites. So we have the DNA, we have the bases which are specifically modified, and then we have strand cleavage at those modified sites. So this is used in the Maxim Gilbert method in DNA sequencing. So by running these fragments on a gel, the DNA sequence can be deduced or inferred. So the main reactions of Maxim Gilbert method target the specific bases, which are G, A plus G, C plus T, and C. So the target bases are guanine, adenine guanine, cytosine thymine, and cytosine only. So the chemical used for specific target bases are different. So when you use dimethyl sulfate, the target base is guanine. When we use formic acid, the target bases are both the purines, that is adenine and guanine. When we use hydrazine, it targets both pyrimidines, that is cytosine and thymine. And when you use hydrazine in high salt concentration, like 1.5 molar NaCl, we target only cytosine. So this is a quick table and specifically discussing regarding the hydrazine reaction now. So hydrazine N2H4 is a nucleophilic reagent that targets specifically the pyrimidine bases. So it targets both cytosine and thymine. So both cytosine and thymine are pyrimidines, which means they have single six-membered heterocyclic ring. So in the previous session, we discussed the structures of both purines and pyrimidines. Purines are two cyclic rings, and pyrimidine is a single cyclic ring, which is a six-membered heterocyclic ring. So hydrazine attacks and breaks open this pyrimidine ring, forming a hydrazone derivative. So once the base is modified, piperidine is used to cleave DNA backbone at the modified base. So the selectivity of hydrazine is C plus T versus C reaction. So C plus T, as I just mentioned, just hydrazine alone will break the ring of both cytosine and thymine, causing cleavage at both the bases. So wherever there is C and wherever there is T, at all the specific regions, we will have a cleavage. However, if we use it in high salt concentration, that is in the presence of 1.5 molar NaCl, along with hydrazine, then we can specifically target only cytosine. So use hydrazine in the presence of approximately 1.5 molar NaCl or high concentration of salt. High salt suppresses the thymines reaction, leaving only cytosine susceptible to the hydrazine attack. So basically, the high concentration will prevent the uh, reaction with thymine, Then only cytosine is left because hydrazine selectively acts on only the pyrimidines. So this results in hydrazine breaking the ring of specifically cytosine itself. So this was about the hydrazine. The next is regarding the Edman degradation. So let's just go step by step into the process. So Edman degradation is a classical method used to sequence amino acids from N terminus of a peptide. So the amino acids or the amino acids, they have uh, when in a peptide they have an N terminal and a C terminal. So the first amino acid has a N terminus and the last amino acid has a C terminus. So this breaks the N terminus of this is used to sequence the N terminus of a peptide, one residue at a time. So it was developed by Per Edman, and the reaction, the first step in the reaction is with PITC. So it is phenyl isothiocyanate. The peptide is treated with PITC under mild alkaline condition or basic condition. So PITC reacts specifically with the free amino alpha group, the alpha amino group of the N-terminal amino acid. So this forms a PTC derivative, that is phenyl thiocarbamyl. Then the next step is cyclization and cleavage step. So under acidic conditions, the first step was basic, the second step is acidic. Under acidic condition, the PTC derivative cyclizes and cleaves off the N-terminal amino acid. So once the derivative is formed, then we have cleavage at the N-terminal amino acid as a PTH derivative. So we have a phenyl hydantoin. So then we go for identification. So the PTH amino acid can be identified usually by chromatography, while the remaining peptide is one residue shorter. That is, whatever is the first one that has been cleaved is left, and the remaining peptide is now N minus 1 and can be subjected to further rounds of Edman degradation. So it is a step-by-step process where we go to each amino acid one at a time. So basically, the reagent used here is PITC, and the intermediate that is formed is phenyl thiocarbamyl derivative, that is PTC, and the final product that is formed is PTH amino acid, which will be removed from the original sequence. So this is a short recap of the Edman degradation. Then next is regarding the Sanger's reagent. So Sanger's reagent is 1-fluoro-2,4-dinitrobenzene or FDNB. Excuse me. Sanger's reagent is a classical chemical that is used to determine the N-terminal amino acid of a polypeptide chain. It was first developed and used by Frederick Sanger in the 1940s and 50s during the landmark work of sequencing insulin. So he first sequenced insulin peptide, for which he also received a Nobel Prize in chemistry. So the basic chemical structure and properties of FDNB. So the IUPAC name of this is 1-fluoro-2,4-dinitrobenzene, and this is the chemical formula C6H3FN2O4, and a common abbreviation is FDNB. It is an electrophilic aromatic compound with two strongly electron withdrawing nitro groups and one fluoro group. So we can see here it has two nitro groups and one fluoro groups. So the nitro groups are electron withdrawing groups, and then we also have the fluoro group on a benzene ring. So this fluoro and nitro groups are attached to the benzene ring. So therefore the name 1-fluoro-2,4-dinitrobenzene. These groups make the aromatic ring highly susceptible to nucleophilic aromatic substitution. So this is the key to its reactivity with amino groups. And the reaction mechanism in Sanger's method is first is the reaction with the N-terminal amino group. So FDNB reacts specifically with the free alpha amino group here also, and then the N that is at the N terminus of the peptide or the protein. The nucleophilic nitrogen that is present in the amino group attacks the activated aromatic ring of the FDNB. So due to the two nitro groups which it has, which is strongly electron withdrawing in its nature. So this displaces the fluorine atom, and then this forms a stable DNP derivative. So it forms a dinitrophenyl derivative. Then there is hydrolysis of the peptide. The peptide is then treated with a strong acid uh, like HCl at high temperature, which hydrolyzes all the peptide bonds and breaking the peptide into free amino acids. So here all the peptide bonds are broken in the complete chain, and then we have all free amino acids in the sample. So, however, the DNP amino acid formed from the N-terminal residues remains unstable under these conditions. Therefore, a mixture of free amino acids and one DNP amino acid is produced. So, in the previous method, we had one amino acid derivative, and then we had a peptide chain that is N minus 1. But here we have a mixture of free amino acids because all the amino acids in the peptide are broken into free forms. So, therefore, we have the DNP amino acid that is separated, which can be done using chromatography, and that will be identified. Then this tells you which amino acid was at the N terminus. So even though we have all free amino acid in the sample here, we can only first know about the first amino acid at the N terminus. So this is a comparison between the different methods that is used for N-terminal labeling, and like the Sanger method where we use FDNB. So this the reaction that takes place over there is nucleophilic substitution, and we get a DNP amino acid N-terminal only. And in the previous case, that is the Edmond degradation, we have PITC as the reagent, and it is a reversible derivatization. Then here we can have a sequential identification of each amino acid in the peptide, because here the cleavage is of only one residue at a time. So after each round, we will get to know sequentially what is the next amino acid. Then we also have something called as the Danzel method, which uses Danzel chloride. And here we have N-terminal labeling with a fluorescence. So this is highly sensitive detection. So fluorescence helps you detect even better. So this is a quick comparison. Then coming to the next, that is trypsin. So what exactly is trypsin? Trypsin is a serine protease enzyme. It basically is a proteolytic enzyme that cleaves peptides. So a class of proteolytic enzyme that hydrolyzes the peptide bonds in proteins. So it is produced as the inactive precursor of trypsinogen in the pancreas and becomes active in the small intestine, where it plays a crucial role in protein digestion. So in our body also we have trypsin, which helps in digestion of proteins that are present in the food. However, it is proteolytic enzyme, so it can cleave the proteins present in the tissues as well. So to prevent that, it is produced in a precursor form. Most of the enzymes, proteolytic enzymes that are produced in our body, are produced in its precursor inactive form, which is a gen form. So when you have a gen suffix attached to the name of an enzyme, that means it is its inactive form. So in the same way, trypsin also is produced by the pancreatic cells in its inactive form, that is the trypsinogen, and then it gets activated in the small intestine where it becomes trypsin, and now the trypsin is active and it starts proteolytic degradation or digestion. So, beyond digestion, trypsin is also used in biochemistry and protein sequencing because of its high specificity for cleaving peptide bonds. So, scientists have made use of this property of trypsin in detecting the sequence of proteins or in any other biochemical techniques in laboratory uh, procedures. So, this is because it has a very high specificity. That is, trypsin recognizes and cleaves the peptide bonds based on the side chain of the amino acid at the cleavage site. So, its specificity is determined by the shape and charge of its substrate binding pocket, that is its active site, that is the S1 pocket. So, the enzyme basically has a binding site in the protein or in its substrate. So, that is where it is uh, in the active site. So the S1 pocket of the trypsin contains negatively charged aspartate residue. So aspartate 189 at the bottom. So this is the active site that is present in the S1 pocket. And this negative charge attracts and binds positively charged side chains. Then as a result, trypsin specifically recognizes and cleaves the peptide bonds after the basic amino acids like lysine, arginine, and so it is highly specific to these two sites for cleavage. So, since the shape and charge of it is helpful in this negative charge will attract the positive charge side chains. So the basic amino acids are the ones which have positive charge, like the arginine and lysine. So therefore it cleaves the basic amino acid sites. So the cleavage rule is trypsin cleaves on the carboxyl side of either lysine or arginine. That is, it breaks the peptide bond after these residues. So if you basically have a sequence of amino acids and there is a lysine residue at fourth position or arginine residue at the fourth position, so it will cleave the peptide at that position where lysine and arginine is present. So due to this specificity, it can be used specifically to sequence the proteins. So trypsin does not cleave if the basic residue is immediately followed by proline. So this, however, has a exception. So it does cleave the basic residues, but if the basic residue has a proline attached next to it, then trypsin cannot cleave it. This is because proline's rigid cyclic structure distorts the peptide bond conformation, preventing the enzyme from accessing the cleavage site. So as we know, the active site of the enzyme has to be, bound, or it should be accessible to the cleavage site. So if there is a proline ring attached, so we know it will change its conformation. You will have like a bend in the protein generally wherever there is proline present. So due to the cyclic nature, so this will not help the accessibility of the enzyme to the substrate cleavage site. So that is the reason, even though there is a basic amino acid at a particular site, if it is not cleaved, that means there is a proline that is immediately following that sequence. So the basic applications of trypsin in biochemistry is in protein sequencing, in proteomics and mass spectrometry, and also in cell culture. So because of its predictable cleavage pattern in protein sequencing, trypsin is widely used to generate the peptides for sequencing. It is used in both Edman degradation or also in mass spectrometry, that is more recently used. So in case of proteomics also, like we use mass spectrometry there as well. So trypsin digestion produces peptides with sizes suitable for the mass spectrometry analysis. In cell culture, trypsin is used to dissociate the adherent cells from the culture dishes by cleaving extracellular matrix proteins. So, like I said, trypsin can also act on the tissues and the cells. So, we even make use of this property of it So where in cell culture, when we grow cells, the mammalian cells, we grow them on a petri dish. The adherent cells usually are attached to the surface of the petri dish. So when you have to subculture or when you have to harvest the cells, you have to detach them from its surface. So one way of doing this is to add trypsin in the petri dish. So this will cleave all the attachments of the cells to the petri dish and also to the surrounding cells. Cells also have cell to cell contact. So all these contacts are broken down by trypsin. So once it's broken down, the cells will detach from the plate and you can collect it in the media. So trypsin is a very regularly used reagent in cell culture methods. So this was regarding the trypsin. So the basic thing that we need to remember is it attacks the lysine and arginine residue, which are basic in nature, because these positively charged side chains are attracted to the negative charged aspartate residue in the active site of the enzyme. Then next, just a second. Okay, so let's continue. Yeah, so the next is regarding the DNTPs. So let's talk about the structure of DNTPs. DNTPs are deoxynucleotide triphosphates, that is a nucleotide attached to three phosphate groups. So DNTP is basically the building block of DNA and consists of a nitrogenous base, either a purine or a pyrimidine. Then we have a deoxyribose sugar group, and then we have three phosphate groups attached to the fifth carbon of the sugar. The deoxyribose sugar in DNA already lacks the OH group, that is why it is a deoxyribonucleotide, and at the second carbon, hence the deoxy, but still has a OH group at excuse me, still has the OH group at the third carbon. So this 3-OH is essential for DNA synthesis because DNA polymerase forms a phosphodiester bond between the third OH and the fifth phosphate group of the incoming nucleotide. So during DNA synthesis, we know nucleotides are attached to each other between the third OH group of the previous nucleotide and the fifth phosphate group of the incoming nucleotide. Then we have dideoxynucleotide, so which is DDNTPs. So here we have dideoxy. So this is deoxy because it has no OH group at second carbon. This is dideoxy, so it doesn't have OH group at second carbon and at the third carbon. Here we use the third carbon's OH to form a bond, phosphodiester bond between nucleotides. But NTPs lack this third carbon OH group. So NTPs are basically modified nucleotides which are used in Sanger's DNA sequencing. So they differ from normal DNTPs by lacking the hydroxyl group at the third carbon as well, along with the second carbon. So in DDNTPs, the 3' OH group is replaced with a hydrogen group. So due to this, there cannot be addition of a new nucleotide to the already existing DDNTP. So the small change is critical because a 3OH, at 3OH, the DNA polymerase cannot add another nucleotide, leading to chain termination. So without this group, you cannot add another nucleotide. Therefore, the DNA synthesis stops at the DD, wherever the DDNTP has been added. So this leads to the termination of the chain. So this was made use by the Sanger in DNA sequencing. So whenever he added a particular DNTP along with the DDNTP, so when there is a DNTP, the addition continues, the DNA sequence grows. But when you add DDNTP, the DNA sequence stops there. The chain termination occurs. So you can know if there is an addition of ATP and it stops, that means the previously added sequence was A. And then next, if you add a DDTTP and if it stops, then the next sequence is T. So on. So that is how he figured out how to sequence DNA. So significance of this in Sanger sequencing. During Sanger's chain termination method, so since he used DDNTPs, which terminates the growing chain of DNA during synthesis, it is also called as chain termination method. So a small amount of DDNTP is added along with normal DNTPs. When DDNTP is incorporated into the growing DNA strand, elongation stops. That is, the chain terminates because there is no 3OH for the phosphodiester bond. By analyzing the lengths of the terminated fragments, the DNA sequence can then be determined. So, if you have a 2' carbon with an H attached to it and a 3' carbon with an OH attached to it, this allows chain elongation. But if you have a 2' carbon with H and a 3' carbon also with H, then the chain terminates. That is, this is your DNTP, this is your DDNTP. So if you add a DNTP, the chain elongates. If you add a DDNTP, the chain terminates. This is during the DNA synthesis. So this was how DDNTP was used to sequence or to determine the sequence of the DNA in Sanger sequencing method. Next is regarding the Maxim-Gilbert sequencing. So the Maxim-Gilbert method is chemical cleavage sequencing. It is an early DNA sequencing developed by Alan Maxim and Walter Gilbert. It involves chemical modification and cleavage of radio-labeled DNA fragments at specific bases. Then this is followed by gel electrophoresis and autoradiography to read the sequence. So let's just go step by step how the procedure follows. The first step is end labeling the DNA. So the DNA fragment, second. So the DNA fragment to be sequenced is labeled at the 5' end with a radioactive phosphate group. So remember, at the 5' end we have 3 phosphate groups and at the 3' end we have an OH group. So here uh, Maxim Gilbert have made use of the 5' end phosphate group, unlike Sanger who took advantage of the 3' OH. So here they have labeled the 5' phosphate group with a radio labeled phosphate. So this will allow us to visualize it when exposed. Then, uh, then there is chemical cleavage. So the labeled DNA is divided into 4 samples, each treated with chemicals that cleave at specific bases. So when you treat them with chemicals specific bases, it will cleave. So like we can cleave it at guanine specifically, we can cleave it at both adenine and guanine, we can cleave it at both cytosine and thymine, and we can also cleave it specifically at cytosine. Then we run a gel to analyze it. Then resulting DNA fragments of different lengths are separated based on their size in a denaturing polyacrylamide gel electrophoresis. So we use page gel. He used page gel here to separate out the fragments. So polyacrylamide gel is used instead of agarose because it has much higher resolution and essential for distinguishing fragment which differ just by one nucleotide. So generally we use agarose gel for running nucleic acids like DNA or RNA. That is when we just have to visualize the DNA, or even know the difference in the lengths of the DNA. But the DNA lengths in case of agarose gel has to differ few base pairs in size. Only then it can be resolved properly, because agarose is not as uh, efficient in case of the separation like page, that is polyacrylamide gel. So here, since we have to identify the difference in the two sequences, even at one nucleotide change, they have used polyacrylamide, which gives a better resolution. So then, after running it in gel electrophoresis, it is exposed on an X-ray film, that is autoradiography. So the gel is placed against an X-ray film. So because it is radio labeled with phosphorus, the radioactive DNA bands expose the film, producing an autoradiogram. So the film then produces a detection kind of image, which is called an autoradiogram. Each lane represents cleavage at specific bases, and by reading from the bottom, that is from the smallest fragment to the largest fragments, the DNA sequence is determined. So we can know if we have the smallest fragment, where at which specific base it was cleaved, then we go like in an ascending order, then we can easily detect the complete sequence of the DNA, because we are cleaving them specifically at these particular sites. So you can know when it is cleaved at this position, this position, this position, this position, you can understand the sequence of it. So basically, the gel used for separation here is polyacrylamide gel, because of its high resolution to differentiate the difference between just a single nucleotide change. And visualization method is autoradiography, which gives you an autoradiogram, that is X-ray film exposure. And the purpose is basically to determine the DNA sequence. So this was regarding the Maxim Gilbert sequencing of DNA. Next is regarding the reagents DDT, beta mercaptoethanol, and iodoacetic acid. So DDT or beta mercaptoethanol breaks the disulfide bonds. That is, it attacks the SH groups, and the product it gives is two free cysteine residues. Iodoacetic acid is alkylates the sulfide, that is the SH, to prevent the disulfide reformation. So here the product is carboxymethyl cysteine. So let's go step by step. So first, reduction of disulfide bond occurs. So many proteins have disulfide bonds between them. So once the peptide is formed, the protein has to attain a certain conformation. So these conformations are maintained usually. It includes different bonds, and different interactions. And one of those bonds are disulfide bonds between the cysteine residues that help stabilize their 3D structure. So, to study or sequence a protein, these disulfide bonds must be broken, or it must be reduced to free thiol groups, that is the SH group. So, we use reducing reagents like dithiothiol, that is DTT, or beta mercaptoethanol. Then next, alkylation to prevent the reformation. So after reduction, if nothing is done, the free thiol groups, that is the SH group, can reform the disulfide bonds. So it's reversible, and it is a spontaneous reaction. So to prevent this reaction, they are alkylated and blocked. So mostly the alkylating agent that is used is iodoacetic acid or iodoacetamide. So iodoacetic acid reacts with the SH group of the cysteine, that is the thiol group, and this replaces the hydrogen atom of the thiol with a CH2COOH, that is a carboxymethyl group. So therefore we have a carboxymethylcysteine at the end of alkylation. So now there cannot be a reformation of disulfide bond. The alkylation step ensures that the thiol groups cannot oxidize back to form a disulfide bond. This is essential for accurate protein sequencing, mass spectrometry analysis, or structural studies. Then coming to cyanogen bromide. So cyanogen bromide is used for cleavage of polypeptides. So it is a chemical reagent for specific cleavage at methionine residues. So this is widely used in protein sequencing and mapping. The main target residue is methionine. So the cyanogen bromide specifically reacts with the sulfur atom present here in the methionine. The reaction is that the peptide bond on the C terminus of the methionine is cleaved, and the methionine itself is converted into homoserine lactone at the cleavage site, and therefore the polypeptide fragments are generated at positions immediately following the methionine residues. So the peptide bond that is at the C terminus. So in the previous methods we discussed where at N terminus we have cleavages, and from there we can uh, deduct the sequence. But when we use cyanogen bromide, the peptide bond on the C terminus, that is the other end of the peptide, which has methionine, is cleaved. So methionine is then converted into homoserine lactone at the site of cleavage. Finally, the polypeptide fragments are generated at positions immediately following the methionine residues. So these fragments can be analyzed by sequencing or mass spectrometry. So cyanogen bromide cleavage produces, basically, if you have a alanine methionine, we have a alanine homoserine lactone. If you have a glycine methionine, we'll have a glycine homoserine lactone. So serine will be your last fragment. Then this is a small table regarding the reagents that is used for cleavage. So cyanogen bromide is used for cleavage after methionine. In case of trypsin, cleavage occurs at basic residues, that is lysine and arginine. There is also chymotrypsin, which cleaves at phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. And then we also have hydroxylamine, which cleaves the aspargine and glycine bond. Then next is blotting techniques. So we have different blotting techniques where we can run DNA, RNA, protein to identify them using probes. So they are named southern, northern, western, eastern blots. So the blotting techniques are molecular biology techniques used to detect specific biomolecules like DNA, RNA, or protein, and each one is has a distinct target. So southern blot is a technique where we use to detect the DNA. So the target molecule is the DNA, and the detection probe method is DNA or RNA probe. Then in case of northern blot, we detect RNA. So here also we can use either DNA or RNA probe that is complementary to our target RNA. Then western blot is generally used for proteins. So in case of proteins, we use antibodies against the specific target uh, against the specific target protein that we are looking for. And then we also have eastern blot where we can see post translational modification on proteins. So here specific ligands or antibodies like uh, phosphoantibodies or some other kind of antibodies can be used to detect the post translationally modified proteins. So coming to northern blot, there is a brief step-by-step procedure here. So first we have sample preparation. So northern blot is for RNA. So RNA is extracted either from blood, tissue or cells, and it is denatured to remove its secondary structure. Then we run it on gel. So gel electrophoresis is performed on agarose. So RNA fragments are separated on the agarose gel, and usually it has formaldehyde to maintain the denaturation. If there is secondary structure formation, again there will be error in the detection. Then once it is completed, we have transfer. So RNA is transferred from the gel onto a nitrocellulose membrane or a nylon membrane. Then hybridization is done. That is, a labeled probe is used, either a DNA or RNA, complementary to whatever sequence we need is used to target the RNA sequence. And then probe binds specifically to that particular target of RNA because it's complementary, and then it is detected. So the probe used can be of different types for visualization. It can be radioactive probe, it can be fluorescent probe, or a chemiluminescent probe. So then when you expose it to UV or X-ray, then we can detect our target RNA, indicating the presence and also the size of the specific RNA. So basically, northern blot is done for RNA detection, and it is widely used to study gene expression patterns, detecting mRNA levels in different tissues or at different disease conditions. So this is a brief gist of northern blot. So just remember that southern blot is for DNA, northern blot is for RNA, western blot is for protein, and eastern blot is for PROS, translationally modified proteins. The steps are more or less similar. It's just the detection probes that are used for each of the target molecule differs. Then next is the Gabler-Hoffman method. So the Gabler-Hoffman method is a classical technique that is used to synthesize complementary DNA from mRNA. So when we use mRNA and uh, synthesize a DNA complementary to it, it is called cDNA or complementary DNA. It is widely used in molecular biology techniques for cloning eukaryotic genes and also to study gene expression. So the steps involved in these are annealing of the mRNA. So first you have to isolate your mRNA, however, then annealing of the mRNA and the oligo DT primers. So we have a poly A tail in the mRNA which we make use of. So if we add a oligo DT primer, a simple way to start the synthesis. So mRNA is hybridized with the oligo DT primer that binds to the poly A tail of the mRNA. The first strand, that is cDNA synthesis, uh, is the reverse transcriptase enzyme that is used, because here we are going in reverse transcription. Usually it is from DNA to RNA, but now we have to do from RNA to DNA. So reverse transcriptase synthesizes a complementary DNA strand along the mRNA template. Then creation of NICs in RNA DNA hybrid. So once the cDNA is synthesized, it will be complementary to the RNA. So it is in a DNA RNA hybrid now. So we need only the DNA. So we have to break apart the hybrid. So the RNA in the RNA DNA hybrid is partially degraded to allow second strand synthesis. Then this is done using RNase H enzyme, which cleaves the RNA and leaves the DNA strand alone for second strand synthesis. An enzyme that specifically cuts the RNA in RNA DNA hybrids at multiple sites. Then the second strand cDNA synthesis occurs. Then we use DNA polymerase. So now our template is DNA, so we can use DNA polymerase. And usually DNA pol 1 is used. It extends the fragments to synthesize the second DNA strand, forming double stranded cDNA. Then basically we use RNase H to break the RNA DNA hybrids so that the cDNA can be used for second strand synthesis. Then RNase H creates NICs in the RNA of RNA DNA hybrids. These nicks serve as primers for DNA polymerase 1 to synthesize the second DNA strand. Without RNase H, efficient second strand synthesis would be difficult. So, this basically improves the efficiency of second strand synthesis. So, this was about the Gabler-Hoffman method and the use of RNase H. Yeah, do you guys have any doubt up until now? I think we can take a 5 minute break. If you have any doubt, you can ask me over the mic, or you can also write it down in the chat box. Any doubt? Okay. We'll just take a 2 minute break. If you guys have any doubt till now, please let me know. Yes. So, yeah. Is there a question? Yeah. For unknown DNA sample, how do we design primer? Okay. So, for an unknown DNA sample, we have to make use of the conserved regions. So, basically, in every gene or every protein, there will be certain sequences which are conserved throughout the species. So we if the different sequences, like if the sequence of the entire protein is not known, or if some specific region is known, we can make use of that. Or we also have homologs of the same gene in different species. So basically we can do alignment of the gene sequence uh, of whatever is available, or we can just take the conserved regions of that particular gene from a different species and design a primer for that. So conserved sequences will not change from species to species. We mostly take a closely related species, then we can design a primer for that particular conserved sequence. So it will help us uh, amplify that region of gene. or that gene completely. Okay, I hope that answers your question. Sanger's sequencing and Maxim Gilbert sequencing, which is more efficient, and is there any specificity regarding any research aspect? They both are sequencing methods, it's just a different way to sequence it. As far as I know, I don't think there is anything that is specific in terms of research aspect. Uh, I'll let you know if there is any. But as far as I know, it's not. Because both of them give you like the sequence in one nucleotide difference. So I don't think there should be any. Okay. Any other question? Okay, so if there are yeah, so if there are no more questions, I think we can continue. Where were we? So we were talking about RNA's edge, right? Yeah. So the next is again regarding the northern blot. So northern blot, yeah, actually Sanger and Gilbert, like I think Sanger is more preferred because of the chemical toxicity as per, yeah. Okay, I'm not sure. I'll just find out and let you know. But I think Sanger is more preferred. I'll just let you know. I'm not able to recollect it right now. So let's go to the next one. Where am I? Yeah. So yeah. So northern blotting and autoradiography. Northern blotting is used to detect specific RNA sequences. One second, excuse me. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. So northern blotting is used to detect specific RNA sequences, and after after hybridization with a label probe. So like we discussed, we use a label probe which is complementary to our RNA, and it is used to visualize the target RNA. So the steps involved, we briefly discussed the hybridization. The labeled probe binds specifically to the target RNA on the membrane, and then we have an X-ray film, and the membrane is placed in close contact with it to detect the radioactive probe. The conditions during the development is the film is exposed at a very low temperature at around minus 80 degrees to increase the sensitivity of the detection and reduce the background noise, then prevent diffusion of the radioactive signal. So it also depends on the exposure time. It can range from hours to even days. So we need to remember these are the earliest techniques that were invented. So it requires lot of conditions, lot of toxic chemicals, lot of uh, radioactive substances, and it is uh, like heavily time consuming. So this can range from hours to days depending on the radioactivity and desired signal strength. So the key points are autoradiograms in northern blot are not developed at room temperature or high temperatures. Low temperature preserves the radioactive signal and enhances the image clarity by reducing the background. So next is regarding the sequences. So like we discussed regarding the cyanogen bromide. Cyanogen bromide specifically cleaves after methionine. So every chemical, if you remember at what particular position or what particular residue, if it cleaves, it will help you to deduct the sequence. So cyanogen bromide specifically cleaves after methionine residues. So each cyanogen bromide fragment leads to ends with M. So unless the M is at the C terminal end. So then we have trypsin. Trypsin cleaves at basic residues, that is lysine and arginine, except when it's followed by a proline. So give the sequence that was given is this, and after the double digestion with cyanogen bromide first and then trypsin, the observed fragments were these amino acid sequence and L and R separately. So we know because they have used trypsin, we have our lysine and arginine, and then this ends with a methionine here, so it's likely because of the cyanogen bromide fragment, and then there are smaller fragments produced because of the trypsin, and then this has a K, so trypsin cleaved after K in the original cyanogen bromide fragment. Then we have the R single residue, L single residue that is left, so that is because of the trypsin. So then we have to use these sequences and fragments to reconstruct it. So to begin with, first cyanogen fragment has R, and then the second cyanogen fragment has the methionine left here, and then the third fragment has the LTVFWK. So then when we use all these to combine the matches. The original peptide sequences are where trypsin was used to cleave. So we have the R fragment that is observed. And then we have the M end that is by the cyanogen bromide. So we have this fragment, and then we have this where that is due to both cyanogen bromide and trypsin cleavage. So therefore the original sequence must be your R first, and then your cyanogen bromide cleaved fragment first, and then your this fragment. So this method is called fragment mapping, and it is a classical protein sequencing method. So based on whatever chemical is used, we have to combine the sequences. So depending on their position, depending on which chemical is used first, whether they are used together, at what point it was used, and after which after addition of what chemical, which fragment was given, we have to make use of all of this. Then next is stepwise northern blotting procedure. So we have already discussed this. We have to first isolate our mRNA, then we have to separate it. We have to use our oligo DT columns to purify it, and then separate it on agarose gel. So RNA is denatured to prevent the secondary structure, and then it is separated based on their size, and then it's transferred onto an NC or a nylon membrane, which helps it easy for hybridization with the probe. Then we have a cDNA probe, that is the complementary DNA probe that is prepared, and it is labeled either with radioactive substance, fluorescence, or chemiluminescence. So then we have hybridization of this, and then we have to expose it on an autoradiogram with an X-ray film. So then we have to do some washing steps to wash away the excess probe, and then visualize the RNA probe hybrids, indicating the presence of the target RNA and also its size. So this is a sequential stepwise procedure. And the main points to remember is mRNA isolation comes first. Separation of on the gel happens before the transfer. Then we have probe preparation, which can be done at any time and it must be ready before your hybridization step. So then we have our hybridization step that occurs after the transfer to the membrane, and then we have autoradiogram that reveals the target sequence. So first mRNA isolation, then run on the gel, then we have our probe that has to be prepared for hybridization. Then we transfer the protein into onto the membrane, and then we use the probe to hybridize it, and then autoradiogram. We have to expose it to an X-ray film to visualize the target RNA. So that is it for that. And next is phenol chloroform DNA extraction. So phenol chloroform DNA extraction is a classical method for purification of DNA from the cells. It separates the DNA from proteins and other cellular components based on the solubility difference. So first we have to lyse the cells to extract our content. So cells are lysed using the buffers containing detergents like SDS and salts. Then proteins are denatured, phenol chloroform is added. Phenol is organic and it denatures proteins. Chloroform improves the separation, and then the mixture is vortexed and centrifuged. So then phase separation occurs when you centrifuge it. After that, you form three different layers based on the phases. We have our upper aqueous phase, which is DNA, which is soluble in water. Then we have an interphase of protein and debris. Then we have a lower organic phase, that is the phenol chloroform, which contains lipids, hydrophobic components, etc. etc. So we only collect the upper aqueous part to then again precipitate out the DNA. Then DNA recovery is done. The aqueous layer is carefully collected. Then the DNA can be precipitated using ethanol or isopropanol. So proteins do not dissolve in water, aqueous phase, or in fully in organic phase. They accumulate at the interface, and it makes it easy to separate it from the DNA because DNA is soluble in water. Then RNA usually stays in the aqueous phase unless RNase is added. So when you extract, both DNA and RNA is extracted. If you want pure DNA, you can add RNase, which will degrade your RNA. Then coming to enzymes, chymotrypsin and pepsin. Chymotrypsin is a serine protease and its optimal pH is 8. And pepsin is an aspartic protease and its optimum pH is acidic, that is 1 to 2. And chymotrypsin cleaves the peptide bonds on the carboxyl side of aromatic residues, that is phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan. And then pepsin is used to cleave peptide bonds between aromatic residues, phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan before the aromatic residues. So this is on the carboxyl side of the aromatic residue, and this is before the aromatic residue. So chymotrypsin binds to the peptide bonds in proteins via its hydrophobic pocket and accommodates the aromatic side chain. It cleaves after the aromatic residue, that is after the C terminal. So it will cleave after the tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine. Then pepsin specifically works in stomach, as we know, like the stomach's pH is very acidic in nature for digestion. So pepsin works at stomach's acidic pH and therefore it needs 1 to 2 pH for active functioning, and cleaves the peptide bonds preferentially before the amino acids. So the aromatic residues tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine provide a favorable binding site for the pepsin active site. Then why phenylalanine is common? So both enzymes recognize aromatic rings. Phenylalanine has a benzyl side chain, making it hydrophobic and aromatic. This allows both pepsin and chymotrypsin to bind efficiently despite pH optima difference and cleavage direction. So then this is Given options, we have leucine, lysine, arginine, phenylalanine. So since we know that they cleave at the aromatic site, whether before or after, in the given options, the only one which has an aromatic ring or benzyl side chain is phenylalanine. So it is cleaved by both chymotrypsin and pepsin. So that is it about the enzyme action of pepsin and chymotrypsin. Then again, we have Sanger sequencing. So Sanger sequencing is based on chain termination and using DDNTPs, and this method requires a primer to initiate the DNA synthesis. So because it's chain termination, we have to start DNA synthesis and it requires a primer. So primer annealing is done. DNA pol can add nucleotides only to the 3' OH. We have discussed this, and a single stranded DNA primer is needed, and then primer is complementary to the 3' end of the template strand, meaning it binds to the 3' to 5' template strand that is present. And then DNA pol extends the primer from 5' to 3' direction in the new strand, that is synthesizing the new strand complementary to the template DNA strand. Then DNA synthesis, the reaction mixture contains DNTPs for elongation. This is the normal DNTPs that we add. Then for Sanger sequencing, we have to add DDNTPs for termination at specific bases. So DNA polymerase adds nucleotides until a DDNTP is incorporated. Then chain termination occurs. So reading the sequence by performing the reaction with different DDNTPs and separating the fragments by polyacrylamide gel, the DNA sequence can be read from smallest to the largest fragment. So these are the specificities of it. Primer binding site, DNA synthesis direction, purpose of primer to provide a 3' OH for initiation, and termination reagent is DD entities. Then again, coming to Maxman Gilbert. So Maxman Gilbert is a chemical DNA sequencing technique which is specific bases are chemically modified and cleaved. So we use DMS, that is dimethyl sulfate. So dimethyl sulfate is a chemical methylating agent. It methylates the N7 position of guanine. So after methylation, treatment with a cleavage reagent like piperidine causes the glycosidic bond to break, so opening the purine ring at C8 and N9. Then this is called a G reaction in Maxim Gilbert method, and the G reaction specifically targets the guanine residue. So G reaction is by DMS, A plus G reaction is by formic acid, C reaction is by hydrazine, and CT reaction is by also hydrazine. Uh, the C reaction is hydrazine at higher salt concentration. So, like I said, yeah, I think it's the use of this toxic chemicals. The method is less preferred, and also uh, during the synthesis, it also depends what kind of polymerase if we are using, which will give you the accuracy of addition. Sometimes if DNA pol is not correctly used, your accuracy might not be very good in case of Sangers, but if you use the appropriate DNA pol, Sanger sequence will be better. Then uh, key points to remember for Maxim Gilbert is guanine is the base target. Then we have dimethyl sulfate for it, G reaction, and DMS methylates N7 of guanine. Then piperidine breaks down the glycosidic bond. Then it generates DNA fragments ending with G. This is then separated on a polyacrylamide gel to determine the sequence. Yes, then yeah. Then we have northern blot and sodium citrate buffer. So in northern blot, RNA fragments are separated on the agarose or page gel depending on whatever difference you want to observe. So formaldehyde gels and then transferred onto a nitrocellulose or a nylon membrane. During the transfer and hybridization, the buffer system is very important for maintaining the integrity of RNA and efficient binding. So we use sodium citrate buffer. Typically transfer blotting and hybridization of RNA onto the membrane because it provides ionic strength to facilitate the nucleic acid binding to the membrane, and it stabilizes the pH to prevent RNA degradation. So RNA is sensitive to hydrolysis. Like we know, RNA is not very stable like DNA. So RNA can be hydrolyzed in alkaline conditions. The pH of sodium citrate buffer is usually maintained at 6.5. So sodium citrate buffer is prepared at 6.5, which is slightly acidic to neutral. This ensures that RNA remains intact. Then it also maintains proper hybridization condition for labeled probe. So that is the importance of sodium citrate buffer in northern blotting. Then coming to uh, the Maxim Gilbert method and Sanger sequencing. So before 1970s, the sequencing of DNA was extremely difficult because there was no appropriate method. Scientists needed a method to determine the precise nucleotide sequence in DNA fragments for the studies. So two major sequencing methods were developed independently around 1977. So Maxim Gilbert is a chemical method and Sanger sequencing is an enzymatic chain termination method. So the developers of Maxim Gilbert is Alan Maxim and Walter Gilbert in 1977. So we have discussed all the chemicals that are used to cleave at particular nucleotides here and how it is detected. And then Walter Gilbert and Alan Maxim uh, provided first widely adopted chemical sequencing. Around the same time, Sanger developed enzymatic chain, so which eventually became more popular. Yeah. So basically, it eventually became more popular because it was safer and easier to use. Because it does not use some toxic chemicals in which are generally used in Maxim Gilbert. And however, Maxim Gilbert he introduced the concept of base specific cleavage. It laid foundation to modern DNA techniques. So each has its own specific pros and cons, but I think the only difference is the toxic chemicals that is used in case of Maxim and Gilbert. So I guess that is it for this session. So is there any other doubt? And just come in a minute. Yes. So are there any doubts? Okay. 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 For uh, I don't know which is better. It depends on like what kind of institute you want to get into. Most of them accept both GATE and CSIR net. Uh, if you want to get specifically into IITs, I would suggest GATE. And if you are open to working in any CSIR institutes or in universities, then I think CSIR should do better. It's nothing like which is more better. I think it's best if you clear both, but either one should also work perfectly fine. It depends on specific institute basically. Few of them have CSIR preference, few of them have GATE preference, few of them accept either one. So it depends on whichever institute you want. You can check for whatever is the eligibility criteria. But it's better you attend both and try to clear both of them. Yeah. Anything else? Mapping of the fragments. Which one? This one? The trypsin and cyanogen bromide. Yeah, so basically we know, right, where trypsin cleaves and where cyanogen bromide cleaves. So trypsin cleaves after methionine. So whatever fragment has methionine at the end, you can know that its cleavage is because of cyanogen bromide. And lysine and arginine are basic, so trypsin cleaves them. So here we have both L and R, and then we also have this two short sequences with M at the end. And then the M and the N could suggest that it is because of the cyanogen bromide fragment. And then we also have LR in this fragment. So these smaller fragments are produced by trypsin acting on the other CNBR fragments. So we have lysine here, K. So it could be because of the trypsin cleavage. So we can think that this is because of trypsin, and then we can think that this is because of cyanogen bromide. Then R is a single residue, so that is also could be cleaved because of trypsin, because both K and R, that is arginine and lysine, are cleaved by trypsin. Then we have L, that is like L. Yeah. So then we have L, that is a leftover after the trypsin cleavage. So there can be like different ways how you can interpret it. I'm uh, just a second. No, no, no. Wait. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so where were we? Yeah. So basically, we know R can be cleaved by trypsin, K can be cleaved by uh, trypsin, and M can be cleaved by cyanogen bromide. Then, but we also have another residue. What is it? We also have another single residue left here, that is L. So the L is not particularly cleaved by either of them separately. So it has to be a cleavage product of both of them, cyanogen bromide and trypsin. So if we take this sequence, it is because of bromide fragment which was already cleaved, and trypsin then cleaves at K. So then we have remaining L from the cleavage. So basically R is cleaved by trypsin, M is cleaved by cyanogen bromide. Then we have L, which could be because of cyanogen bromide and trypsin action. So that is the reason that the sequence could be R, Q, P, N, L, I, M, L, T, V, F, K, whatever those amino acids are. So just remember that trypsin cleaves at R and K, and cyanogen bromide cleaves at M. So if the link is broken at M, that means after M there could be a sequence. Anything? I don't know if it is clear. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, great. Then anything else? Any other question? So if there is no other question, I think we can end the session here. Thank you for attending. If you like have further doubts or if you want more clarification, you can mail me. So this is my mail ID. You can mail me at this. Okay. So thank you. Bye bye. Yeah. Any guidance for NPTEL final exam? Uh, I'm not sure about the final exams because we are only instructed to help you with the assignments. So what you can do is you can put up a query in your group email, or you can contact the support for such doubts, because we are not sure about the exam pattern or anything. You can just put up a query. Somebody from the support team will help you with that. Okay. Okay. Shall we end the session then? Is there anything else? Yeah. Okay. Sure. Bye bye. See you in the next session.